January 22nd, 1879, a mission station in South Africa. Just 150 British soldiers stand behind swiftly built walls as 4,000 Zulu warriors appear on the horizon. The odds seem impossible, yet what happened next would become one of history's most extraordinary last stands. At Rorke's Drift, two young lieutenants, John Chard and Gonville Bromhead, made a decision that defied all logic. They would not retreat. They would stand and fight. Behind makeshift barricades of mealie bags and biscuit boxes, these men, soldiers, engineers, storekeepers, and even the wounded, prepared for the coming storm. For 12 relentless hours, they faced wave after wave of attacks from elite Zulu warriors. When the smoke cleared, they had fired nearly 20,000 rounds and lost just 17 men. Against overwhelming odds, they had stopped an army that had just obliterated a much larger British force at Isandlwana. This is the story of how discipline, leadership, and sheer determination transformed ordinary men into legends. Before we dive into this incredible battle, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from history's most decisive moments. January 22nd, 1879. The morning at Rorke's Drift began peacefully as the sun rose over the Buffalo River. Lieutenant John Rouse Marriott Chard of the Royal Engineers stood by the riverbank, observing the ferry shuttle back and forth. Everything appeared normal. Not far away at Isandlwana, disaster had already started. Thousands of Zulu warriors were attacking. The British camp was breaking apart.
South rampart at 100 yards!
And gunfire echoed across the landscape hills. At Rorke's Drift, only about 150 men were posted there for defense. Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead of B Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Regiment, was in command. He was respected by his men, even though he was partly deaf. With him were Lieutenant Chard, a few engineers, some storekeepers, and 30 wounded soldiers lying in the hospital. At 3:15 p.m., the calm ended. The sound of running horses filled the air. Two riders appeared, having escaped from Isandlwana, bringing terrible news that the camp had been destroyed. Over 1,000 men were dead, and a Zulu army was heading toward Rorke's Drift. There was no way to escape, and no reinforcements were coming. Vane rode on to warn Helpmakar, but Adendorf stayed to help defend the post. When Lieutenants Chard and Bromhead heard that the British army had been destroyed at Isandlwana, they knew the Zulus would soon reach Rorke's Drift. With about 4,000 warriors approaching, they faced a hard choice: run or fight. It was Acting Assistant Commissary James Dalton who convinced them to stay. Retreating with over 30 wounded soldiers would mean certain death. So they decided to fight. The soldiers worked frantically, turning the mission station into a fort. They stacked heavy mealie bags, sacks of corn weighing 200 pounds, into thick walls and filled the gaps with wooden biscuit boxes and meat crates. They built a defensive wall linking the hospital to a stone cattle kraal, then added a smaller inner wall as a backup line. Inside the hospital, windows were barricaded and loopholes cut for rifles. 6 men were chosen to defend it, each man silently prepared for a fight that might be his last. At around 4:30 that afternoon, the lookout on Sheane Hill, known to the British as Oscarsburg, spotted movement on the horizon. At first, it looked like waves of heat on the horizon, but soon the truth became clear. Rows upon rows of Zulu warriors were marching over the ridge, their shields shining in the sun. At the front rode Prince Dabulamanzi Kampande, half-brother of King Cetshwayo, eager to win the glory he had missed at Isandlwana. Around 3,000 to 4,000 Zulu warriors advanced toward the mission station, defended by barely 150 men. They were no wild mob. The Zulu army fought with discipline and deadly precision, using the buffalo horn formation. The center held the enemy while the sides curved around to trap them. Each warrior carried an ikawa, a short stabbing spear, and an isilangu, a tall cowhide shield, both made for close, brutal combat. As they approached, fear spread among the British auxiliaries. Nearly 300 men of the Natal native contingent dropped their weapons and fled, leaving about 140 defenders, mostly from B Company of the 24th Regiment, to stand alone. Behind hastily built barricades of mealie bags and wooden crates, the soldiers watched as the Zulu ranks chanted and beat their shields. The defenders braced themselves. The storm was coming. At Rorke's Drift, the British defenders had one clear edge: technology. Their secret weapon? The Martini Henry rifle. This single shot, breech-loading gun fired a heavy .450 caliber bullet with fatal power. One officer famously called it the most perfect weapon in the world. Its range reached 800 yards effectively, sighted to 1,400, and every soldier carried 70 rounds, backed by a massive reserve of 20,000 more. But this weapon came with a price. The recoil was fierce enough to bruise shoulders and cause pounding headaches. After long bursts of fire, the breech could overheat, making shells jam or even tear apart inside. Yet in skilled hands, it was nothing short of lethal. The Zulus, meanwhile, relied on courage and tradition. Most carried their signature short-stabbing spear, the Iklewa, and hide shields. Some had old rifles, many captured from the British at Isandlwana, but few knew how to use them effectively. Their strength lay in speed, numbers, and ferocity in close combat. This set up a deadly equation. If the British could hold the Zulus at range, the rifles would tear through them. But if the Zulus could close in and storm the barricades, their sheer numbers and melee skill would crush the defenders. The entire battle came down to one question: who could control the distance? As the African sun began to sink, 150 men prepared to face an army nearly 30 times their size. What followed would become one of the most legendary last stands in military history. Around 4:30 p.m., the first Zulu attack began. Hundreds of warriors swept around Shian Hill and charged the southern wall. The crack of Martini Henry rifles filled the air as the defenders fired volley after volley. Zulu warriors fell in waves, but there were too many. Some reached the barricades. Seeing that direct attacks were failing, the Zulus changed their plan. They went for the hospital, the weakest point, with thin walls and few defenders. By 6 p.m., fierce hand-to-hand fighting broke out inside. Private Henry Hook stood among the flames. Unlike the lazy soldier shown in the movie Zulu, the real Hook was disciplined and hard-working. That night, he became a hero, fighting with rifle and bayonet to protect wounded men as Zulus smashed through the doors. Nearby, Private John Williams, real name Fielding, ran out of bullets. Grabbing an axe, he hacked holes through the hospital's inner walls. Hook fought off attackers as Williams broke through room after room, dragging patients to safety. By 6:45 p.m., the thatched roof caught fire. Flames spread fast, filling the building with smoke and heat. The hospital became an inferno, but Hook and Williams refused to give up. They saved 8 men, dragging them through burning rooms while fighting hand-to-hand. Hook was the last to escape around 9 p.m., just before the building collapsed. Some patients were lost, their screams fading into the night. Rorke's Drift was now a burning fortress, but the line still held. Against thousands of warriors, barely 150 men stood firm. The battle was far from over, and the legend of Rorke's Drift was only beginning. As the hospital burned fiercely, Lieutenant Chard quickly realized the danger. His men were being pushed back. The Zulus were using the thick smoke and bright firelight as cover, slipping closer to the barricades. The worst pressure came near the cattle kraal, where large numbers of warriors were gathering for another charge. If that part of the line broke, the whole defense would collapse. Seeing they could no longer hold the outer walls, Chard made a bold decision. With Corporal Dunn and 4 other soldiers, he began stacking 2 tall piles of mealie bags into a new, tighter defensive position, right in the center of the post. This would be their fallback point, the inner redoubt. From this raised position, the men would have a clear line of fire in every direction if the Zulus broke through. They worked under constant danger. Spears and the occasional gunshot flew over their heads as they lifted and stacked the heavy bags. Somehow, in barely 10 minutes, the new redoubt was ready. The wounded were carried inside for safety, while the best marksmen climbed to the top to cover their comrades with steady rifle fire. All along the barricades, acts of courage kept the defense alive. Private Frederick Hitch and Corporal William Allen, both badly wounded, refused to give up. They dragged themselves through the dirt, handing out ammunition to keep every rifle firing. Hitch, his shoulders shattered, still made sure no man ran out of bullets. Their efforts kept the line supplied and firing through the night. Corporal Atwood of the Army Service Corps stood alone at a small window of the storehouse. His duty was critical but straightforward: shoot any Zulu who tried to set the thatched roof on fire. For hours he held his position, firing with calm precision. Thanks to his steady aim, the roof never caught fire. If it had, the defenders would have lost their last shelter. The pressure on the men was unbearable. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and fighting in the glowing glow of burning buildings. Smoke and the stench of fire filled the air. Each man knew there was no retreat and no mercy if they fell. The Zulus fought by an ancient warrior code: no prisoners, no survivors. When night finally fell, the battlefield became a nightmare. The burning hospital threw wild shadows across the compound, making it almost impossible to tell friend from enemy. The Zulus, usually unwilling to fight after dark, broke their own traditions that night. Again and again, they surged forward, their war cries echoing in the dark as they attacked the shrinking perimeter. The fighting was brutal and close. Zulu warriors climbed the mealy-bag walls, swinging spears and clubs, while British soldiers met them with bayonets. Some attackers managed to get over the barricades, only to be shot or stabbed at point-blank range. The piles of bodies along the walls grew higher, as neither side would back down. Around 10 p.m., the Zulu commanders, called Utabi, rallied their warriors for what seemed to be the final assault. The charge hit with terrible force. The British were pushed back from the cattle crawl and forced to retreat into Chard's newly built inner redoubt, the last stronghold he had prepared. But then the tide turned. Packed tightly inside their smaller, stronger position, the British could now focus their fire. Their rifles blazed, volley after volley, at almost point-blank range. The Zulu momentum faltered, then broke. One by one, their attacks collapsed until the battlefield fell silent. By dawn, the defenders had fired about 20,000 rounds, roughly 200 bullets per man. It wasn't a storm of endless gunfire, as the legends claim, but a steady rhythm, about 20 shots an hour, each one carefully aimed. The recoil from the Martini Henry rifles left many men with bruised shoulders and ringing ears, but they had held. At such close range, even an average shot could kill. What truly mattered wasn't perfect aim, it was discipline. Every man stayed focused, reloaded, and fired together. That steady, relentless defense broke the spirit of an army nearly 30 times their size. By midnight, everything about the battle had changed. The Zulus were no longer charging in massive waves. Instead, small groups crept forward, testing the defenses like hunters circling their prey. But something was different now. Their earlier fury had faded. Those fearless, almost suicidal frontal assaults had finally burned themselves out. The defenders could feel it. The tempo had shifted. The relentless storm of spears and war cries was losing strength. Still, the night was far from quiet. For hours, sporadic shots cracked through the darkness. Then around 4 a.m., the attack stopped. After 12 straight hours of chaos, the silence that followed must have felt almost unreal, eerie, heavy, and uncertain. But no one dared lower their guard. For all they knew, the Zulus were regrouping for one final push. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon on January 23, 1879, the defenders saw the aftermath of their longest night. The ground around the mission station was a haunting sight. Hundreds of Zulu bodies lay still. Many were dead and would later be buried by the British. The hospital was now just a burned ruin, filled with the remains of those who couldn't be saved in time. All around lay broken spears, smashed shields, and piles of empty bullet cases, silent signs of what the defenders had been through. But they had done it. 150 men had stood their ground against 4,000 elite Zulu warriors and lived. The numbers alone sounded impossible. Only 15 British soldiers killed, 10 wounded, and 2 later died from their injuries. After 12 hours of relentless fighting, it seemed almost miraculous. At 6 a.m., the Zulus appeared again on the hills surrounding Rorke's Drift. The defenders took up their positions, hearts pounding, expecting the worst. But this time there was no charge. The warriors simply watched the battered mission station, then turned and withdrew toward the river. 2 hours later, at 8 a.m., the long-awaited relief column under Lord Chelmsford finally arrived. He'd feared the worst, having seen the Undi Corps retreating and smoke rising from the burning hospital. But to his astonishment, the Union Jack still waved proudly above the ruined barricades. As he rode closer, British cheers rang out from behind the shattered walls. Rorke's Drift had survived. Against all odds, it was a complete and astonishing victory. The aftermath of Rorke's Drift tells just how extraordinary this defense truly was. The British buried around 350 to 400 Zulu. For the attacking force, that meant losing around 10 to 15% of their men, a devastating toll for any army. On the British side, the losses were shockingly light. Of the 15 who died, 8 were killed by spears, 4 by Zulu gunfire, and 3 from unknown causes. This detail reveals something crucial. Despite the brutal close-quarters combat often shown in movies, the defenders mostly kept the Zulus at a distance, using disciplined rifle fire to hold them back. Their ammunition tells the story. Over the course of 12 hours, the garrison fired over 20,000 rounds, roughly 82 bullets for every Zulu killed. It might sound like poor aim, but it actually reflects remarkable discipline under unimaginable pressure. Many shots were fired to suppress movements, not to kill, to stop the enemy from getting too close. And perhaps the biggest surprise from the data? The battle wasn't the non-stop frenzy people often imagine. The casualty rate, about 1 British soldier killed per hour, suggests there were long, tense pauses between waves of attack. This doesn't make their stand any less heroic. If anything, it highlights their focus, patience, and tactical intelligence. They refused to panic. They refused to let the Zulus control the rhythm of the fight. The emotional toll, however, was immense. For the British, Rorke's Drift became a lifeline of pride after the crushing defeat at Isandlwana just a day earlier. For the Zulus, it was a bitter lesson. Even the bravest warriors could be stopped by disciplined soldiers and modern rifles. Prince Dabula Manzi, who had led the assault in defiance of King Cetshwayo's orders, returned home in disgrace. He had crossed into British territory against his king's command, and all he brought back were losses. The Battle of Rorke's Drift wasn't just a victory, it became one of the most extraordinary tales of courage ever recorded. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded to the defenders, the highest number ever given to one regiment for a single battle. And this wasn't just British propaganda. These men truly performed acts of unbelievable bravery under impossible circumstances. Lieutenant John Chard, a quiet Royal Engineer, found himself transformed overnight into a battlefield commander. His leadership turned a desperate situation into a masterclass in defense. Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, partially deaf but unshakably calm, kept his men steady when everything seemed lost. Private Henry Hook's story is legendary. Alongside John Williams, he fought through the burning hospital, bayonets in hand, carving holes through walls to rescue the wounded. Their desperate fight, room by room, became one of the most unforgettable images in British military history. Then there was James Dalton, a 46-year-old veteran and assistant commissary. He was the first to urge the men to stay and fight. Even after being wounded, he continued giving orders, holding the defense together. His tactical insight likely saved them all. Private Frederick Hitch and Corporal William Allen, both wounded, refused to stop working. They kept the ammunition flowing between sections, ensuring the defenders never ran out of firepower when it mattered most. And in perhaps one of the most dramatic moments of the night, Christian Ferdinand Schiess, a Swiss volunteer fighting with the Natal native contingent, leapt onto the barricade of mealie bags and single-handedly knocked down 3 Zulu warriors who were seconds away from breaking through. He later died in poverty at sea at just 28, but his courage remains immortal. Even the regimental fox terrier, Dick, was mentioned in dispatches for tending to the wounded and biting a Zulu who got too close. He didn't get a medal, but his bravery captured the spirit of everyone inside that small mission station. No one, man or beast, backed down. Rorke's Drift wasn't won by luck. It was won by smart, disciplined fighting. The defenders understood that retreat meant death. By improving their position, they turned a vulnerable outpost into a fortress. Those mealie bag walls may have looked simple, but they gave the defenders exactly what they needed: height, cover, and time. Each Zulu warrior who climbed over was instantly exposed to rifle fire or bayonet thrusts. The defenders had turned the ground itself into a weapon. Leadership made the real difference. Chard's quick decision to build the inner redoubt gave them a fallback position that saved dozens of lives. Both officers and NCOS kept their men focused. No one panicked, even as wave after wave of Zulu warriors came crashing in. The Martini Henry rifle also proved devastating. Despite its heavy recoil and overheating issues, it was brutally effective in the hands of defenders. With a steady flow of ammunition, thanks to Hitch and Allen, the defenders kept up an unbroken wall of fire that shredded the attacking ranks. What made Rorke's Drift even more remarkable was the teamwork. Riflemen, medics, wounded soldiers, and even patients who could still fight, they all played their part. It wasn't just a battle, it was a perfectly coordinated act of survival. Rorke's Drift became more than a tactical success, it became a symbol. At a time when the British Empire was reeling from the humiliation at Isandlwana, this story of 150 men holding out against thousands restored national pride. It told the world that discipline, courage, and determination could defy any odds. In the end, the story of how 150 soldiers defeated 4,000 Zulu warriors isn't just about rifles, walls, or medals. It's about a night when two civilizations collided, one fighting for empire, the other for survival. The men of Rorke's Drift etched their names into history, but their victory also marked the beginning of the end for the Zulu kingdom. It stands as one of the most remarkable small unit defenses ever fought, a story of duty, bravery, and the terrible cost of empire. And that's the story of Rorke's Drift, a small group of soldiers facing overwhelming odds who refused to surrender. A night marked by fire, fear, and unwavering bravery that transformed ordinary men into heroes and legends. If this story interested you, hit that like button. It fuels the channel and helps bring more untold history to light. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was Rorke's Drift a moment of pure heroism or a desperate fight for survival? For more powerful stories of courage, strategy, and history's defining moments, subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss what's next. Because sometimes the smallest stands echo the loudest through time.